like in Lee Murray, wanted to be world champion in the UFC.
He just happens to be involved in the largest cash robbery in the world.
He's definitely not sane.
Showtime Sports presents the unbelievable true story about the MMA fighter who pulled off one of the largest heists in history.
Huge amounts of money, armed gang, disguises, kidnapping.
This is the sort of thing you see in Hollywood films.
We've never seen that for real.
Catching Lightning, streaming Friday, April 7th, only on Showtime, streaming with Paramount Plus.
Hi, I'm Ryan Reynolds. As owner of Mint Mobile, I couldn't wait to make my first commercial for Spotify listeners. I thought, I'll tell them to go to mintmobile.com/Spotify to get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Then I thought, they'll never believe the owner bragging, so I'll bring on a real Mint customer who knows it's premium wireless for just $15 a month. Then I thought, how will they know it's not just me acting as a customer? Then I thought, what if they don't think I'm a good enough actor to play a customer? Then I cried and went to bed the end.
New activation and upfront payment for 3-month plan required. Taxes and fees extra. Additional restrictions apply. See mintmobile.com for full terms.
Welcome into another Strictly Stripes podcast pre-draft look-ahead edition. Muhammad Ahmad, Andrew Gillis, and Mike Nizick back here with you as we continue breaking down and evaluating the Bengals' biggest positional needs with just over 2.5 to 3 weeks left before the NFL draft. If you tuned in yesterday being Monday, we talked about tight end, the best fits for the Bengals at tight end, where they could go mid-round with that. And so naturally we're going to shift over from tight end to right tackle, which I think is another big area of need for the Bengals, regardless of what happens with Jonah Williams, which we'll talk a little bit about towards the end of the show. But like we did yesterday, guys, I want to ask you, when you look at right tackle, who are the biggest names or a big name that sticks out to you? When do you think the Bengals should pursue A, B, or C person? Why is that the case? And we'll kind of discuss that. So, Andrew, Mike, either one of you guys want to go first as to who you would want to take at right tackle, when you want to take them, and what the justification would be?
Mike, you go first. I went first with tight ends yesterday.
Well, I think obviously depends what happens with Jonah Williams. Like I said, I think yesterday, if they hold on to him, I don't think that you take a tight end in the first round. I think you've seen a lot of the first-round projections have them kind of in the Antoine Harrison out of Oklahoma, Dwan Jones out of Ohio State, if they were to take a first-round tight end. But I don't think that's the route they should go to, especially if you're holding on to Jonah Williams. If they trade him, those guys are probably what you're going to end up with if you go that route. Darnell Wright out of Tennessee seems to be kind of going a little bit out of their range. For me, I think they should draft a guy that they could work with a little bit, more of a project, because they can, wait a year to help him see the field. So for me, that's Blake Freeland out of BYU, a mammoth guy, 6'8", 302 pounds, ridiculous kind of athleticism, 2-year starter, played both right and left tackle for them, started at left tackle the last 2 years. A guy that could, I think, really, once he unlocks kind of the technique part, be a good guy for kind of solving that edge rusher problem the Bengals have had in recent years. He's kind of around a third-round projection. So, around there, I think would be good value for the Bengals to take him, third or fourth, or one of those compensatory picks if he's available. Has all the athletic traits, out at the combine. I think he set a record for his vertical jump, had a under 5-second 40-yard dash. I like drafting a project with sort of those high-end athletic skills that you really could, really has a high ceiling, especially with the right type of coaching, which I think the Bengals feel that
so real quick, so you mentioned Blake Freeland, and it's actually funny because I had him as one of several guys on my list, but you're saying if the Bengals get him, they should do it in the third round. Is that what you were saying? Just so I heard you clearly.
I think the projections for him are around the third round. So around 3 or 4, if you can get him, I know they have probably 2 compensatory picks, I think around there. So I'm not sure, what you'd have to use to get him, but that would be kind of my, projection, for where they would, get the best value for taking a tackle.
Definitely interesting. I want to get to that later, but Andrew, who do you have in mind?
Yeah, I like Mike said, I think a lot of this depends on what's going to happen with Jonah Williams. If Jonah Williams is around, then obviously this needs. I mean, you could make a case if Jonah Williams gets moved, this is the most pressing need on the team. It's it's a pretty unique situation, but either way, I still really like DeJuan Jones, the tackle out of Ohio State. He'd probably have to be your first round pick if you want to take him. Maybe you can kind of like I said with Mayer, I think you might be able to move back with Jones and take him there. But I mean, you're talking about a guy, he's 6'8", 374 pounds. Like he's a huge player. And that obviously would kind of, I mean, you have two 6'8" guys on the left and right side of your offensive line at tackle. You've got a 6'7" guy at left guard, Cordell Volson, 6'6", Alex Kappa. Like you'd have some length there. And, I think, when it comes to one player, it can help. And especially when you have, Orlando Brown and Cordell Volson next to each other, that matters. But when you start to load up these guys kind of across the board, not only do you have some unique attributes, you have a unique attribute for your entire offensive line, and that, those guys' arms are long, and those guys are long, and they're really, really difficult to get around. So, you're talking about a player who he played right tackle at Ohio State. That is kind of the position that you would see him at, because if Orlando Brown is going to be what you want him to be, he's going to be at left tackle. If you pick DeJuan Jones, you're feeling pretty good about him at right tackle. People have raved about him as a pass blocker. According to PFF, he was one of the better pass blockers, if not the best pass blocker in terms of their grades. I've kind of said it depends on what you think of those grades, but they think very highly of him with his pass blocking ability. So it's really hard to get around that guy. He's gonna play right tackle, which is the position that you need. And I think that if you kind of put him in the right system, you're going to be feeling good about that. Obviously, it's going to be a tough sell because I think Mike was on to something yesterday where he said, "Look, you need to find players that are going to win. You need to find players that are going to help you win in 2023. And if Jonah Williams is here, you're not going to see DeJuan Jones probably until 2024 unless an injury hits." But I just think that with his ability and kind of with his upside kind of in the passing game, that's what they saw in Orlando Brown. I think you could make a case you see the exact same thing in DeJuan Jones.
So Andrew, you're saying no matter what happens with this Jonah Williams situation, like DeJuan Jones is a guy that you get because either they trade him and you put Jones in immediately while Lyle Collins is rehabbing, or Williams is back in 2023. You give him a year and he develops. So you're saying he's kind of a flexible pick either way.
Well, yeah. So, if you pick Jones, I think that you kind of look at, the Bengals depth chart and you can start to, assuming Jones is there, like in this hypothetical world, DeJuan Jones is on board, let's say Jonah's not here. If Jonah's not here, DeJuan's going to be your starting right tackle. But if Jonah is here, then your tackle depth is probably, you're probably feeling really good about that compared to where you are across the roster. And then you start to look at a guy like La'el Collins and, hey, maybe he's a cap casualty because, you'd have Orlando Brown, DeJuan Jones, Jonah Williams. Those are your three. Then Jackson Carman can play tackle. La'el Collins, I know I just said you can make him a cap casualty, but he'd be around. You signed Cody Ford as a depth tackle. Like there are options there. You've got Hakeem Adeniji who's played that position. You've got Deontay Smith who's played that position. You've got guys on board, and it'd just be a really, really competitive position in training camp. And I don't even mean for first team reps because you're talking guys need to fight to make the team at that point. So. Yeah, I think that, again, if, offensive line depth is never a bad thing. You heard the Bengals talk about it. I think it was Duke Tobin and Zach Taylor who were like, look, there are – what did Duke say? There are more teams that need – or there are more teams that need offensive linemen than there are offensive linemen kind of at every level. Yeah. You can load up your offensive line with Orlando Brown, Jonah Williams, and then maybe a late first-round pick, a high second-round pick, as your swing guy and as kind of a backup right tackle. I think you're feeling okay about that.
Yeah, it'd be quite a bit because, it honestly makes you wonder, would all of those guys even make it out of camp? Would Adeniji make the team next year? I don't know. And that's assuming, you have Williams back and you have DeJuan Jones or whoever they get at right tackle because you'd be really bloated. Do you wave him to the practice squad? Kind of like the Bengals did with Khalid Kareem at defensive end and other positions. Maybe they do it with Deontay Smith. Who knows? But, Mike, I know you mentioned, in a situation where the Bengals don't trade, I'm mixing my words up. Based on whether or not they trade Jonah Williams, you had mentioned DeJuan Jones as like a potential first-round favorite. I mean, if indeed they do trade Jonah Williams and you really need depth at that position, like, is Jones a guy that you would ultimately pick in the first round versus picking a project like Blake Freeland in the third round, or would you still stick with Freeland anyway?
I'm confused, but if Jonah Williams is traded, I don't know if there's Jones is sort of trended down, sort of to the early second round. I mean, I think if Antoine Harrison's there in the first round, he'd probably be a better pick. More experienced, I think. Has a lot of upside as well. Played at obviously a high level the last 3 years. So I think he'd probably be preferred based on where they're drafting. And if they wanted to trade back, try to get 2 picks and draft Jones early in the second, and then address a different need, that might make more sense, just because you might be reaching like 10 to 15 picks to draft Jones at 28.
Got you. So, and that's what I meant to say was, like, if, you don't have Williams and you need a guy like with more depth, like that's what I was wondering, is if you go with Jones. But, it sounds like with DeJuan Jones, Andrew is thinking, hey, that's a guy you get in the first round, no matter what happens with Jonah Williams. Whereas Mike is like, I'm not super sold on DeJuan. Like you said, you have him kind of trending downward into the second round, just based on what you've seen and kind of based on your own personal opinion. I mean, Andrew, what do you think of this? Like, if you're trying to vouch for, like, DeJuan Jones, for the Bengals to take him at first round, like, how do you argue against some of the things that might have him trending downward right now?
In terms of, you're saying, like, why would I make that pick at 28 rather than, kind of go what the consensus seems to be at this point?
Sure, yeah. Like, either, going against, like, why would you make it versus the consensus, or why do you pick him there versus waiting if he's even there in the second round? I guess he'd be gone early, but either way, yeah, like, why would you go against the consensus, I guess, like Mike said?
Yeah, I think you can kind of I think there's a fine line between, wanting to draft best player available, and kind of understanding where you're at as an organization. You reach a point where, if you're feeling really good about DeJuan Jones as an NFL player, but you might get some more help from somebody in 2023 who's a little bit farther down on your board. I mean, that's a tough call, just because, again, you don't want to kind of sacrifice long-term ability for a 1-year gain. And I understand that, you could make the argument that, this offense is going to be the most talented that it'll ever be in Joe Burrow's career, just because, I mean, who knows if T. Higgins is going to be around in 2024. And what happens to the running back room, and what happens to the tight end room and the offensive line, which looks better than it did a year ago. Like, there are questions about this team moving forward. So if you feel good about DeJuan Jones as a long-term player, I think you have to make that pick, because, again, it's, they're not afraid to do it. We've seen this before. They drafted Dax Hill last year. They drafted Cam Taylor-Britt. They're not afraid to draft for a year ahead. And frankly, that's kind of what the good teams do. You draft players that, you think are going to be the best long-term, maybe not the team, maybe not the guys that are going to, give you some special teams help, but not much else. And, around 3 or 4 or whatever, kind of long-term, like you draft players you think can help long-term. So if you think DeJuan Jones, can be a long-term answer, then you have to make that pick. So that's kind of the case, that he's going to fill a position of need either this year or next year. And if you like him as a right tackle for the next, 4+ years, then I think you have to pull that trigger.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, you guys made your cases, and I'm glad you answered those questions, because I think, you and Mike, Andrew, had some really good kind of insights on that. So this is who I wasn't my initial pick. I was actually leaning more towards Jones, like you, Andrew. And it's funny, actually, Mike, I had Blake Freeland as an honorable mention. I have another honorable mention I'll mention later in the show, but, I think we're all kind of on the same page here. But let me kind of ask you guys this, and maybe this is a silly question. I'm sure maybe Doug Glamorise from Buckeye Talk might have a better opinion on this if we have him on in the future. But, obviously DeJuan Jones isn't the only Ohio State guy who's a tackle that's first-round, second-round talent. You've got someone who's a little bit higher than him. That's Paris Johnson. I mean, you want to talk about arms? We're talking about long arms, 36.5 inches. Only 19 players since 2000 have that kind of range. Jones is one of them. Like Andrew said, his are a little bit longer, but I mean, he's 6'6", which means all but one player on your O-line would be 6'6". That would be Ted Karras, obviously. He's 6'4". Kind of well-rounded and really just both the run and pass block. Doesn't dominate in one area, but he uses his arms equally as effectively in both senses. But the reason why I bring him up, though, is because he's a left tackle. And he's even drawn comparisons to, I think, really Orlando Brown, I think, is who he's drawn comparisons to, because obviously he's a left tackle. You know, one of the big knocks is that his athleticism could get a little better, although it's something that a lot of analysts say can come with due time. Even though, again, he's a true left tackle from what it sounds like from watching his tape. Let's say he's available for whatever reason. I don't know that he will be. I think he's ranked really high, but let's say he is. Do you pull the trigger on him and see if you can develop him into a right tackle? Assuming in this case, I should say, assuming you're not going to have Jonah Williams, is that even worth an option, or do you not consider that at all and just say, hey, let's focus on a true right tackle and not make somebody switch over? Because that's basically what they're trying to do with Jonah Williams. Do you avoid a situation like that, or do you have some consideration there?
Well, I mean, you just paid Orlando Brown to be your left tackle for the next 4 years. And not only did you do that, it sounded like with Orlando and, from what he said and, kind of the way he's felt about it for years, it sounded like the pitch was, hey, you're going to get to be a franchise left tackle, and kind of yanking that away from him, pulling the rug out, even if it's a year later. I just don't know if that's necessarily good business. So, I mean, I think what I
mean is, do you get not Johnson to be a backup behind Brown? I'm saying, do you get Johnson and put him at right tackle instead of left? Because Johnson's a true left tackle. I'm saying, do you draft him with the intention of making him a right tackle, where you just keep Orlando Brown at left? I meant to say it like that.
I understand what you're saying. That's a little tougher, I think, than than kind of some people might think. I think a lot of people think, left tackle is the premier position. And, if you kind of look at salaries, it still kind of is. It less so than it was. Right tackle is kind of becoming more and more important as, and people are kind of starting to recognize that. But I don't know. I think it's a lot harder to go from left to right and right to left and from guard to tackle than other people might realize. I think there's a lot of people, hey, if you're a decent tackle, you're going to make a better guard. Or if you're decent on the left, you're going to be better on the right. I just don't know if that makes sense. And I'm not sure that that's the way that players look at it and that's the way coaches look at it. So you have to be comfortable with that. And I think it matters if you've got a guy who has played kind of all over the offensive line. I mean, you look at a guy like Cordell Volson. That was one of the things that, they liked him at North Dakota State, where he played right tackle, he played guard, he played the left side, he played everywhere you possibly could on the offensive line. And that versatility matters. So I don't know. I think if you're going to draft a guy that high, you would like to have some kind of knowledge that he can play left and right, or he can play exclusively right. Because I just don't see a left tackle kind of coming into their plans at this point.
Mike, do you second all of that, or do you have a different insight on that?
I mean, most guys in college have played a little of both, at least in terms of like tackle. I think if you're moving a guard, that's probably different. But I mean, you have to, if they like a guy, I think, like I said, I think they're confident enough in their coaches that if he hasn't played right tackle before, but has the physical traits to be able to do it, they won't be scared to sort of pull the trigger on that. I don't think they draft anybody right now with the intentions of him playing at left tackle for the next 4 years.
When we come back, we're going to talk more about just the offensive tackle, right tackle position for the Bengals. A little more honorable mentions like we did with our tight end picks last night, and much more to come right here on the Strictly Stripes podcast. Hey there, it's Muhammad Ahmad from the Strictly Stripes podcast, and if you still don't know what Cincinnati Football Insider is, listen up. It's a community of fans who want the inside scoop on the Bengals and a direct connection to the podcast and the reporters who cover the team. Here's how it works. Andrew, Mike, and I will text your phone a few times a day with breaking news, analysis, and our insights on the Bengals. And it's the inside scoop on what we're hearing and we're giving you the inside word before it even hits social media. If you join Cincinnati Football Insider, you get to participate on the podcast, and you can text us directly. It's a great way to cut through the clutter of social media for just $4.99 a month. Still not sure? Just try it for 2 weeks, and if you don't like it, you can text the word STOP at any time, but you won't want to cancel once you join the community of hardcore Bengals fans. So here's how you get on board. Text 513-940-4193 or go to cleveland.com/Bengals and click on the blue banner at the top of the page. It's a great time to join as we're covering the NFL Draft, OTAs, mini camps, and much more to come later this year. So give us a try for 2 weeks and see what you think. Just text again the number 513-940-4193. All right, and thanks for staying with us on the Strictly Stripes podcast. And just a quick reminder, we've been mentioning this on our podcast, but to make a point, make sure you sign up for Strictly Stripes newsletter. It is the best newsletter to get your Bengals news, analysis, and opinion in your inbox every morning. Go to cleveland.com/newsletters and go to the Strictly Stripes Cincinnati Football newsletter. So we talked a lot about the Ohio State tackles. We talked about Blake Freeland, who Mike and I were both very high on. But just to kind of wrap this up, guys, are there any other offensive tackles that, let's say the Bengals, want to go kind of the route Mike is saying, pick a third, fourth round project? Are there other names that come to mind as far as like who the Bengals could maybe target in those rounds and why you think that might work if that's the plan the Bengals decide to do?
No,
I don't think there's I don't think this is a particularly deep tackle draft, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's a tons of names out there beyond sort of that top group that kind of gets you excited in terms of like guys that could make an impact or guys that really, you feel good about even kind of settling into a starting job in the next 2 years. I think this is sort of a weaker tackle draft based on kind of, what we've read and seen sort of over here the last month.
Are you with that, Andrew? Like, do you think it's just a matter of you get what you can at this point and roll with it, or is it really? Or you think there's somebody there that's not like the guy, but maybe someone who's kind of hiding in the third, fourth, fifth rounds that the Bengals could maybe take a gander at if they go that path?
I'm intrigued by Andrew Voorhees, the offensive lineman out of USC. He's a bigger guy. He's 6'6", 310 pounds. If you remember correctly, he tore his ACL at the combine. And if you tear your ACL in, late February, early March, I mean, even a 9-month recovery is putting you in December. I mean, that's optimistic. So I think you're kind of looking at basically a redshirt year for a guy like that. But, he's played guard, he's played tackle at the college level. I think that, that could be a guy you're looking at as someone who could say, hey, look, we're going to take a mid-round flyer on this guy because we think that he can help us in 2024 and beyond. And, who knows where he would have gone if he would have been healthy. But, I think that could be a nice little pick. Now, I think if you're going to do that, you have to make sure that if you're going to draft players earlier that can help, because you can't just draft a team of projects. You can't just draft 7 project guys who you hope help in a year or two. But I would kind of look to him. I think he could be an interesting little flyer in the mid rounds.
Yeah, that's a good one. I've been kind of looking at this guy a little bit because he has an interesting story, and that is Tyler Steen out of Alabama. He's kind of like a second, third round projected pick. NFL's tracker has him as a quote-unquote backup with the potential to be a starter. He tested pretty well in terms of his production and athleticism, kind of down the middle, nothing crazy, but nothing concerning. But what's so unique is he started his college career at Vanderbilt, not as an O tackle, as a D tackle. So he was on the defensive line. Then he goes to Alabama. He's a graduate student. He earns all second-team SEC honors. Played left tackle, but again, maybe that's a guy, like if the Bengals think he could do it and they're willing to invest in a guy like that, later in those rounds, second, third round, you could. I don't know if he'd be in their range, but Matthew Bergeron from Syracuse could be another one. Kind of fits a similar bill of what I was talking about with Steen. So I think those are 2 guys that come to mind. I know Andrew's talked a lot about Cordell Vosen's former teammate. Is it Cody Mao? Is that how you say his last name? Keep getting
Cody
it wrong.
Mock.
Yeah, I think, and I'm sure you'd probably agree with me, Andrew, maybe that's a guy that you give a little more consideration to if you want to look in the second, third round. So, again, like Mike said, there's really outside of the first, second round, no one that's just like bedazzles you the same way that like the tight ends and corners and running backs do. But I think with like many drafts,
no one bedazzles you.
Bedazzled, Mike. You never heard that word?
Yes, you're not using it correct. Bedazzled is like bedazzle a shirt with like shiny little pins.
Bedazzled with talent. Like I'm saying, there's not a lot of guys who might be bedazzled with talent compared to like tight ends and running backs and other deeper positions in the draft. Maybe I didn't use the right. I didn't complete the adjective because I should have said with talent. With talent.
I don't think that's a phrase that people use.
Is it not? Or am I guess I'm just weird like that. I don't know.
Not.
Like I'm gonna bedazzle my shoes.
We should have like
or bedazzle this jean jacket, denim jacket.
Commercial from like 2005.
I think I know what you're talking about, but I was like 7 years old, so that was a long time ago. I'm not sure. I feel like at the end of every podcast, we need like Mike to just give us like a grammar lesson because I don't know if it's just being from Kentucky, being from like the corner of the Midwest and the South. My grammar is just awful. I don't know what it is. Forgive me, all the listeners listening to me. I do what I can, but yeah, I think we should do like a special segment where it's just me and Mike. I'm like, okay, Michael, does this statement make sense? Does this word make sense? Because I feel like you're very good with your grammar. I will give you that. I don't know if it's because you're older, or I don't know if it's just you. I don't know. What do you think, Andrew? Should we start doing that?
I don't know.
Mike and Mo's grammar sessions, right?
I don't know. I feel like I'll sit that one out.
Okay. Well, that's what I'm saying. It could be just like me and Mike whenever you have your day off in the future, but we'll roll with it. Well, we're going to keep rolling on through the week as we continue looking at more positions of need for the Bengals with the NFL draft rapidly approaching in a matter of days and weeks. But once again, for myself, Andrew, and Mike, I'm Muhammad Ahmad. We'll see you on Wednesday.